to say about me. I love to sing and I love women.
Dean Martin was more than just a whether he was a singer or an actor. He was always cool, calm, and collected, with a drink in his hand and a joke in his mouth, but behind that easy charm had a life full of loss, pain, and quiet suffering, but he made it to the top. But he paid a high price. From a complicated love life to the death of his father. Dean's life went from being glamorous to sad when his son and then his beloved wife died. Come with us as we take a close look at the man behind the legend, his life, his love, and the pain that followed, which led to his death in 1995. The boy from Steubenville named Dean Martin wasn't always known as Dean Martin. He was born Dino Paul. He was born on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio. His family was from Italy. Gaetano Croetti was his barber dad, and Angela Croetti was his mother. He grew up in a home where only Italian was spoken because his parents were Italian. Dono didn't learn English until he was 5 years old. He had a hard time in school because he couldn't speak English well, so other kids picked on him. He felt like his first few years of school were hard. Afterwards, he said that school wasn't right for him. He joked, I always ate and rode my bike, but those teachers thought I was too smart for them. People laughed at that line, but it also meant something deeper that he didn't understand. He didn't feel like he belonged by the time he was in the 10th grade. He quit school and never went back to the classroom again. That choice led him down a very different path. Full of risks, hard work, and rough jobs. Fight for a future. After leaving going to school, Dino tried to be like his dad, who wanted him to be a barber. But Dino had other plans. He did a lot of small jobs to make ends meet, like helping out at a gas station, milkman, and even he was interested in jobs like drugstore clerk, but these jobs didn't suit him. Boxing. Dino began fighting as Kid Crochet. It was a tough way to begin. He said he fought 12 times and won all but 11 of them, which means but he only won one, and even though it wasn't much, the experience made him stronger. He got cuts, a broken nose, a scarred lip, and cracked knuckles because Dean wasn't just poor, he couldn't even afford the hand wraps that boxers wear. Getting into fights in the ring. When he moved to New York City, he lived with Sonny King, another struggling entertainer. Both of the young men had dreams, but they needed money to live, so they came up with a strange plan and turned their small apartment into a people had to pay to watch the underground fight club fight. They would fight in their living room until someone got. Dean was even knocked out by Sonny in the first round of a real match. He knew deep down that getting beat up every day wasn't what he wanted out of life. He needed to make a change but didn't know what yet because of the smoke. Dino still had to find a way to fill rooms and sing on stage after giving up box. Getting home from work, he found himself in a secret casino hidden behind a tobacco shop. It was against the law, but it paid well. He worked as a roulette stick man. Blackjack dealer. In this world full of smoke, something happened. Dino started to sing out of the blue. At first, he only sang for his co-workers. But people started to notice his voice. It was warm, smooth, and full of charm. One person who heard him was Ernie McKay, the leader of a local band. He asked Dino to join the band, and Dino said yes. And things began to change in his life. He started playing in nightclubs in Ohio. Taking the name Dino Martini from the opera singer Nino Martini in 1938, he did so. He joined up with another famous band leader, Sammy Watkins. Watkins took him on tour and told him one thing that would change his life: change your name to Dean Martin, and by 1943, he had. He lived in New York and did shows full-time, but it wasn't easy. He had to work hard to stand out, and he had to keep changing how he looked. He was not only building a music career, but also a persona, which would soon come together. Become famous all over the world. As Dean Martin's fame grew, so did his act. He did more than just sing, he would hold a whiskey glass as he walked on stage. He looked calm and easygoing all the time, like he was just there to have fun, but that act wasn't his own, he took it from someone else. Named Phil Harris, a performer whose image was built around being a hard-drinking showman who chased women. Dean still made his own style, and his fans loved it. He became known as the King of Cool. But what was going on inside Dean wasn't always the same as what people saw. Dean was quiet and didn't talk. A rare interview with Oriana Felici shows how much they love parties and big events. In 1967, he told me why everyone thought I was cocky and conceited. He said, "I don't know what to say to people. I don't know how to." Even though he was famous, he had trouble speaking English. The way he spoke as a child still made him feel out of place, which is why he kept quiet so often. People got the wrong idea about him. They thought he was cold or distant, but he was just shy, and that made him seem distant. Never really went away, his life was full of contrasts. On stage, he was sure of himself. He was funny and quiet off stage, but he never forgot where he came from. From having a hard childhood and going through inner struggles that stayed with him his whole life. Dean Martin's career took a big turn when he met Jerry Lewis in August 1944. At the Belmont Plaza Hotel, he met a young comedian named Jerry Lewis. Dean was performing at the hotel's Glass Hat Club in New York when he turned to Jerry and said, "Hey, I saw your act. You're a funny kid." Dean and Jerry began a business relationship that would last for 10 years. They became friends quickly and joined each other's acts to make a team. Their first show together was on July 24 at the 500 Club in Atlantic City. 1946, their first show didn't go well, no one laughed, and the club owner was upset. Skinny D'Amato told them they would be fired if the next show wasn't better, so they quickly went to the alley behind the club and came up with a new plan. Jerry would as a careless bus boy while Dean sang, Jerry would drop dishes. Dean would throw bread rolls at him to make a scene. It was crazy, silly, and funny. And the crowd loved it. This new act made them famous. They did slapstick. They didn't care about the crowd as they cracked jokes and made up scenes on the spot. The act that made people laugh the most was when they did it for each other. As they got bigger, they played shows all along the East Coast. Their first big show was at the Copacabana in New York. They were a big hit. In 1948, they got their own TV show. First performance on the first episode of what was then called The Toast of the Town, on The Ed Sullivan Show. Like Rodgers and Hammerstein did to make their act even better, they hired young writing Norman Lear and Ed Simmons, who helped them move on from working in nightclubs to radio and movies. In 1949, they made a deal with Paramount to make the movie My Friend Irma, where they were funny, but the deal gave them freedom. Their Abby Gresseler, their agent, made sure they could make one movie a year on their own. York Productions, and they also had full control over their club shows, records, radio and TV appearances, which helped them make a lot of money. As Lewis wrote in his book Dean and Me, Dean was one of the great comic geniuses they were very close friends. Jerry was even Dean's best man when he got married again in 1949, but there were cracks in the laughter when they started to laugh. Even though they were successful, things weren't perfect, and critics began to say that their movies were too similar. Dean was sick of playing the same part in every movie and wanted something new. He stopped putting as much effort into their performances while they were filming Three Ring. A picture of Circus was on the cover of Look magazine in 1954. It showed Jerry Lewis and actress Sherry North, but Dean wasn't in the picture. Jack Keller, their public relations manager, said it was the last straw. Dean stormed onto with the magazine in his hand. He threw it at Keller and cursed at him. Jerry Lewis remembered a time when Dean's mood changed. Dean said, "Anytime if you want to end things, just let me know." Dean didn't feel like having fun anymore. After the show, he asked, "Why the hell should I come in on time? I have nothing to do." He felt like an extra and not a main character. Dean didn't even sing until 35 minutes into Three Ring Circus, even though he was an equal partner. The movie, and when he did, it was an old song called "What a Wonderful World." When they sang to animals, the partnership that used to feel magical now felt. Dean stayed professional and worked until the end of the contract, but the 10 years after they met, on July 25, 1956, they broke up. Dean walked away quietly, but with his head held high. He was living his life with the Rat Pack after Dean broke up with Jerry Lewis. He didn't slow down, he stayed focused. As an actor and singer, and he quickly became a big name in Las Vegas. Those were the places where he met a group of entertainers called the Rat Pack. A lot of people knew them for Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Laugh Ford. The high-class life of parties, late-night laughs, and drinking, but while the group loved the wildlife, but Dean wasn't really like them to outsiders. Sinatra once made a joke, "He's got a tan." He found a bar with a skylight, but Dean, that wasn't true in real life. Didn't party much while the rest of the group stayed out until morning. Dean liked to do things his own way, so he was often the first one to leave. Someone who opened for Sinatra said that Dean's quiet style annoyed Frank a lot of the time, but that Sinatra came to respect it over time. Dean didn't try to fit in, he just did what he thought was right. Dean and Frank were very close friends with him, and Dean's daughter Diana. It was great to see them on stage together because you could see that they loved and respected each other, and their relationship wasn't just for show. Their families were also close, and they were more like brothers than co-stars. But even close friendships can be put to the test. Dean Martin may have become he was a smooth Hollywood star, but his past wasn't so clean. Before he became famous, he worked as a bootlegging and even bare-knuckle boxing champion. He was ready for when he started working for the mob. Seeing the crowds with the Rat Pack didn't scare him like other things he had seen. The bad things in life, and Frank Sinatra was very close with the mob. Most of the Rat Pack were polite and quiet around gangsters. Dean didn't play by their rules. A group of gangsters came up to him after a show and said, "Thank you for your help." When Dean walked out, he didn't smile, he just looked them straight in the eye. Walked away after saying, "No, I did it for Frank." That brave moment showed Dean wasn't weak because of his past, it made him brave. Dean also had a public. He almost always had a whiskey glass in his hand on stage, which made him look like a heavy drinker. Sammy Davis Jr., a member of the Rat Pack, once joked, "If this doesn't straighten my hair, but the glass really held Martinelli's apple juice, nothing will." Dean's slurred speech and drunken behavior were faked for part of the act. Backup singer Patty Gribbo said it was just show business, and even Jerry Lewis agreed. Dean himself told the Saturday Evening Post in an interview that about a tenth as much as I say I drank, which brings up Dean Martin's charm wasn't just in his voice, it was also in how laid back he seemed. When NBC offered him his own variety show in the middle of the 1960s, he chose the Dean Martin Show. Dean agreed, but only if he could work only on Sundays. Didn't want to practice and wanted to own the show after it aired on NBC. Said yes, and did you know that Dean didn't go to rehearsals? Have a stand-in do the whole routine with the dancers and guests. If when there wasn't a football game on TV, Dean would watch the practice on a screen in his locker room. Dean was there, calm, smooth, and in complete charge. The Dean Martin Show was on from 1965 to 1974 and 40 million people watched because they loved the way he looked. "This show is a hit because it's me up," Natural Dean once said. "On that screen, it ain't nothing fake, that's really me," he said. It's cool that even Elvis Presley looked up to him, even though Elvis didn't get along with singers like Sinatra. He looked up to Dean, who was one of Elvis's singing idols in the 1950s. Even sang Dean's hit song, Everybody Loves Somebody, with Dean at a concert. And the Dean might not have been a reader, but he loved comic books. All that he once said, "If you have luck, the only full book I've ever read was Black Beauty." He seemed very laid back in that line, "You don't have to be smart." Even as an adult, he read comics. One of the few times he was bored was when he met Bob Kane, the man who made Batman, and Dean even played a part in his own movie. They worked together on a comic book series with Jerry Lewis called The Adventures of Dean Martin, and between 1952 and 1957, Jerry Lewis was in 40 issues. He was a quiet star with a heavy heart. In 1987, Dean Paul Martin, Dean's son, died in a plane crash. Dean's heart, he pulled away from many things, like being friends with Sinatra. He even quit their tour. That's when the distance started to grow. Tom Dries later said that this was the time when, as time went on, they grew apart. Dean had lost a part of himself. After Dean died, the two men made up. They didn't let that rift last forever. Sinatra said, "Dean has been like the air I breathe." His words were very moving. He was always there, close by, and a brother to me, not by blood but by choice. Dean Martin stayed humble even though he had a lot of success with his TV shows and records. Never tried to get attention. In 1965, he began The Dean Martin Show, a variety show. His show, in which he sang, joked, and always looked calm, became a big hit. Dean made it look easy from 1974 to because of his laid-back personality. 1984, he was the host of the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast, which had famous people, comedians, and even politicians were made fun of, and Dean stayed became another fan favorite. Working hard to play on stages in nightclubs and record music before he died, he had been in 85 movies and TV shows and sold over 12 million records in the US alone and more than 50 million records around the world. American songs like That's Amore, Sway, Everyone Loves Someone, and Ain't That a Kick in the Head is still being played. Dean Martin made people laugh, play music, and remember good times today. But behind all of that meant more to him than most people knew, and it had to do with his personal life as well. Dean Martin got married for the first time in love and to start a big family. 1941, he married Elizabeth and Betty MacDonald. She was his first love, and Becky and Dean lived together in the early years of Dean's career, when she helped him build his family. Heights, Ohio, after they got married and not long after started having kids. Their first child, Craig, was born in 1941, then Claudia in 1944, and Gail in 1945 and Diana in 1948. They had 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. After 8 years of marriage, they decided to split up. Dean won custody of all 4 kids in 1949, even though they were going their separate ways. After the divorce, Betty moved to the San Francisco area. Betty's time with Dean may have come to an end when she died in 1989 and was in the news early, but she was there while he was still making a name for himself. He was known for having a big family, and she helped raise the first half of it. Their kids stayed close to Dean. Dean's life changed again soon after Betty left him, even though they were no longer together. Life for someone who would be more than just his second wife, the wife who joined Dean 24 years after he split up with his ex-wife. He got married again after his divorce from Betty was over. His second wife was Jean Beager. They got married on September 1, 1949, at the Jerry Lewis owned a famous club in Hollywood and was Dean's best man. Jean had Dean and she met at a club in Miami on New Year's Eve the year before. I don't know who Dean or Jerry were at the time, but Jean told an author Nick Toscus, "When we looked at each other, I knew we were madly in love." Dean Paul Jr. was born in 1951, Richie in 1953, and Gina in 1956. Dean already had 4 kids from his first marriage, so Jean became a stepmother to 4 more kids. Together, they raised 7 children. In his comedy One of the Kids, Dean often made fun of his growing family. "There's a joke about him that everyone knows: I've got 7 kids. Most of the signs around my house say, hello, goodbye, and I'm pregnant." Dean and Jean's life looked they were one of Hollywood's most famous couples. They looked great together. Dean became a famous singer, actor, and Vegas headliner while they were married. Joined Frank Sinatra in the famous Rat Pack, but even with all the things that went well didn't last forever. On December 10, 1969, Jen said in a statement that they were splitting up. The divorce was officially filed. In 1972, after 24 years of being together, Dean was, when asked about it, the person who filed used another famous line. "I know it's being a gentleman means letting the wife file, but everyone knows I'm not." Even after they got divorced, Dean and Jean stayed in touch, especially after a tragedy struck their family many years later, and it was the end of their short marriage and wedding. Dean wasn't single for long after getting divorced from Jean in the same year. 1973, he married again, this time to Catherine Horn in Beverly Hills. A family friend put them in touch with the salon receptionist, and they quickly decided to marry each other. Their big wedding was full of Hollywood stars, Frank Sinatra, but even though the wedding was big, they weren't going to stay together. Dean and Catherine were married for only 3 years before they split up. Dean adopted Catherine's daughter Sasha in 1976, even though they didn't have any kids together. Dean was done with marriage after this. He never got married again. Catherine was his last wife for the last 19 years of his life, but what's interesting is Dean got back together with Jean after his breakup with Catherine, but they weren't together again. After the sad death of their son, they spent time together even though they were married again. Dean and Jean got back together in 1987 after a breakup. Dean's son Dean, he was only 35 years old when he died in a military jet crash. Dean was devastated by the loss, which changed him deeply. This tragedy brought Dean and Jean closer together. Again, they stayed friends after their divorce, but this time their friendship grew stronger. Jean helped him deal with the grief of losing a child. Dean had a hard time getting better. Many people say he was never the same after that. Jean and Dean stayed together close until Dean died on Christmas Day 1995 from complications from lung cancer. Jean lost the man she used to call the love of her life. She never got married again and lived a quiet life in Beverly Hills until she died in 2016. Was 89 years old and had been sick with cancer for a long time. The musician had died in August of that same year. Dean and Jean may have ended their marriage in divorce, but they stayed close until the end. Though Dean Martin was thought to be a family man, things weren't always so great. There were rumors of affairs going on behind the scenes, and 1 year later, in Sandra's memoir, an explosive secret and a shocking story found their way out. Sandra Lansky, the daughter of the famous gangster Meyer Lansky, said she had having an affair with Dean Martin while he was still married to Jean, and not just any time, but Gina. Sandra wrote in her while Jean